Makes sense. I mean, nothing.
You don't want any
gradual sway.
Yeah, and you don't want to see any violent movements of your hips in any direction.
Right. You obviously don't want violent thrust.
Yeah, the thrust, absolutely.
What's that called again?
Yeah, that's it.
And then you don't want to see a lot of jumping, even with the driver. You're going to see some. We've got to see extension, but we don't want to see sharp peaks.
See, and what we saw is your thrust curve is really, really good because it's, it actually goes down a little bit. So you're creating lots of space there. And then at the end, there's no violent thrust forward. So you're not going heavy into the positive numbers there. And then the lift, again, you're seeing that little tiny peak there. And that's just you making that.
Starting to extend.
Yeah. Using the ground to push off of. And again, I don't think you want to see a big peak in that either. So, just this is the first time, when we flip the camera on, this is the first time I've ever seen it. I would look at that and go, you know what? I think that's pretty close to what a good player's graph would look like.
Do you think that this particular graph, and we'll look at ribcage, sway, thrust, lift here in a second, but do you think that this particular graph will have value for you when using the MySwing system?
You know what? I think any of these graphs are going to have value because, and again, it doesn't even have to be about good or bad. Right. What I mean generally good or bad. If you've got, okay, so let's say this was, a flush shot for you, and then you thin one and wipe it to the right. I guarantee you we're going to see something different than that. Yep. So now we're going to know good shot looks like this, bad shot looks like that. So even on a 14 handicap, the higher the handicap, the more fluctuation you're going to have in a graph like this between a good and a bad swing. And that way, so we'll be able to look at, so you got a 15 handicap. He pures one. It's a nice little 3-yard draw. We see what the graph looks like. Then he gets up there and just, dead shanks one.
Yep.
And I guarantee you we'd look at the dead shank graph and hypothetically we would see a giant peak in the hip thrust.
Sure.
And so you'd be able to tell the guy, well, sir, when you don't thrust your hips toward the ball, you hit it well. When you thrust your hips toward the ball, you shank it.
Sure. And again, we don't have to become experts right away in the shape of the curves.
No.
If we can keep from seeing really, really sharp peaks and valleys.
Yeah.
And then we also, again, will always have the value at any position in the swing that we, we want to compare to, whether it's address or whether it's, top of backswing, impact, halfway down on the downswing, even post impact. Don't be afraid of the curves. Again, always.
It's for comparison.
Yeah, it's for comparison, and we'll always have the value. We'll always show the value in relationship to the positions on the during the swing that we're showing on the avatar.
Right. It's like somebody. I had somebody the other day that reads MRIs all day. Okay. And I showed him not this graph because this one's new, but some of the other graphs. Mm-hmm. And he goes, if I was showing an MRI to a layman, if you see this, that's no good. You don't have to know how to read the graph to read the whole MRI. When you see this,
white tumor or something.
Yeah,
right?
That's no good.
Yeah, no
so
good.
That's bad, and that's kind of the way these things are. You don't have to know everything about it. You can look at it and say, all right, as long as I don't see this, I know we're we're in the zone somewhere.
Sure, absolutely. Well, we've taken a pretty in-depth look at pelvis sway thrust lift. Let's take a quick look at ribcage sway thrust lift. Obviously, the terms are the same. Sway is movement toward and away from the target. Thrust is movement toward and away from the ball, and then lift is toward and away from the ground, up and down. So at the top of the backswing, and again, this is ribcage sway thrust lift. So we see I've got the center of my rib cage moves slightly toward the target. Mm-hmm. So again, I load left just a little bit.
Yep.
Hitting an 8-iron, if that's with driver, maybe that's too much. But this 8-iron was hit pretty well, so this might be pretty close to what my ranges should be.
Right.
Thrust, I've got a little bit of movement away from the ball. So I'm rotating away.
Absolutely.
I'm not moving down a whole lot this way.
Right.
Moving away from the ball. And then lift, I was actually pretty level. The center of my rib cage didn't move a whole lot.
And I don't think you would want that because I think that would be indicative of doing something like this.
Yep. And again, we've got to look at these terms this motion in the 3D world because we're doing
Right.
the 3 motions at one time. But it's also very important to find outliers when you're looking at this graph and something sticks out, right away. Say I've got sway 4 or 5 inches toward the target,
Right.
and again, you'll see the big peak, and that's where a red flag goes off in your mind, and it's something you might want to take a look at.
Right.
Let's go to impact. So we see I really stayed pretty much still with my rib cage.
That's what you want.
My hips went forward. I maintained, so my hips went this way. I maintained a little bit more secondary tilt,
Yep.
something we've covered in the past. Thrust, I had none. I stayed back, creating space for my arms to travel. There wasn't a whole lot of that movement. And then lift, I stayed pretty level throughout. As you can see, the purple curve, the pink curve, I stayed pretty much level until to the very end of the finish.
Yeah, I think, and again on this one I think we can say, I think I can safely say there is a right and a wrong here. You don't want to see any sway from the top of the swing to impact.
Yeah, so what would that show? Somebody trying to move too much this way?
Yep.
A guy that comes over the top, shifts the path too far left.
Gets in front of it, take deep divots.
Steep or inconsistent angle of attacks.
All that bad stuff.
All that fun stuff.
Yeah, so some of these it's like, well, the good or bad is going to be in relation to yourself.
Right.
So like on the hip movement, I think we could say lots of thrust would be a bad thing.
Early, especially in the downswing.
Absolutely. And then on the rib cage one, we wouldn't want to see any sway toward the target during
Sure.
the downswing.
Sure. And that's where you can look at both of the graphs together. And if there's no lateral movement of the pelvis or of the hip coming down, then we're probably going to see the lateral movement of the rib cage
Yep.
coming down, and they're going to coincide with each other a little bit.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, so in this video again, to recap, we took a look at pelvis and rib cage sway thrust lift. These are some new graphs that we're excited about with the MySwing system. Monte, thanks again for
Thank you.
for the help. Check them out at MonteScheinblum.com. Thanks again, guys.